I am 84 years old, and for a long time, walking felt like a silent torture. It wasn't the kind of pain that made you cry out, but the kind that lingered step after step until it stole the joy of even the smallest moments. My ankles ached, my knees creaked, and the soles of my feet burned as if every stride came with a hidden cost. What used to be simple, walking to the bakery, climbing a single stair, bending to pick up a sock, turned into exhausting battles I could no longer win. At first, I thought it was just age catching up with me, that heaviness in the mornings and stiffness in my legs. But the pain never left. It became a shadow clinging to me, shrinking my world more each day. I tried everything. Pills that upset my stomach, creams that promised miracles but only cooled the skin, exercises that left me more frustrated than relieved. Every failed remedy chipped away at my hope. Doctors said the same words, "It's normal at your age." As if suffering was part of the bargain for making it this far. I wanted to believe them, but deep down I wondered, was this really all that was left for me? I thought that with enough effort, enough prescriptions, and enough patience, I would eventually find something that eased the pain in my legs and back. But life has a cruel way of teaching you that not every effort brings results. What began as a stubborn ache in my knees grew into something larger, a constant weight that followed me into every corner of my life. And with it came the endless cycle of failed attempts, each new hope wrapped in a pill bottle, a jar of cream, or a set of instructions from someone who had never truly felt what I felt. The daily struggles started small, almost laughable at first. Putting on socks took longer than it used to, and I needed to sit down halfway through tying my shoes. Carrying a bag of groceries up the porch steps felt like climbing a mountain. I found myself resting after sweeping just half the kitchen floor. At times, I would stand in the living room, looking toward the hallway, and wonder if the walk to the bedroom was worth the effort. Pain has a way of stealing not just strength but choice. What you once did without thinking becomes a calculation, a negotiation between your will and your bones. I tried to fight back in all the conventional ways. The medicine cabinet in my bathroom looked like a small pharmacy. Ibuprofen, acetaminophen, naproxen, they all had their turn. At first, some of them worked for a few hours, dulling the sharpest edge of the pain. But then the relief faded, and the pain returned, sometimes worse, as though mocking my attempts. And soon the pills came with their own set of punishments. Stomach cramps, heartburn, nausea. One doctor told me to take a second prescription just to protect my stomach from the first. That was when I began to feel like I wasn't treating pain anymore, but simply managing side effects stacked on side effects. Then came the creams. The pharmacy shelves promised miracles in small, expensive tubes. Menthol rubs that gave a cooling tingle, arnica gels that claimed to heal inflammation, and ointments with names so long I could hardly pronounce them. I tried them all, rubbing them on knees that groaned with every bend, on ankles swollen like overfilled balloons, on a back that stiffened at the slightest movement. For a moment, I would feel a cold sensation or a warm flush on my skin, but deep inside, where the pain truly lived, nothing changed. The creams ended up stacked in a drawer, half-used and forgotten, like silent witnesses of my disappointment. Friends suggested exercise. Gentle stretches, yoga for seniors, even short walks around the block. I wanted to believe movement would help. I bought a resistance band and a pair of small hand weights. My daughter even surprised me with a stationary bike, convinced it would help me rebuild strength without leaving the house. I placed it in the corner of the room, full of good intentions. But every time I sat on it, the pressure on my knees screamed louder than the promise of health. After a handful of attempts, the bike became a piece of furniture, covered with a towel, gathering dust. And it wasn't because I lacked the will. I wanted desperately to feel better. But when every stretch burned like fire, and every step came with the fear of collapse, motivation alone could not carry me through. I remember watching videos of cheerful seniors moving gracefully through simple routines. They made it look so effortless, as though age had barely touched them. I tried to imitate, but instead of confidence, I felt clumsy and broken. Each failed attempt reminded me not of what I could do, but of everything I had already lost. The financial strain added another layer to the suffering. A pension is supposed to provide security, but mine felt smaller every year while the cost of treatments grew larger. Every new cream or supplement, every doctor's visit or physical therapy session, pulled money out of my pocket that I didn't really have to spare. I began to hesitate before filling a prescription or booking another appointment. I told myself I was being practical, but deep down I knew it was also fear. Fear of spending what little I had left on something that would, once again, let me down. There's a special kind of pain in handing over money for hope, only to receive nothing in return. But worse than the pills, the creams, or the bills was the hidden pain that no one sees, the loss of dignity. Pain strips away not only mobility but also the small freedoms that make you feel like yourself. One morning, I bent down to pull on my socks and felt a sharp stab in my lower back so fierce I nearly toppled over. The socks slipped from my hand, landing on the floor, just out of reach. I sat there, staring at my own feet, feeling ridiculous and humiliated in my own home. The tears that welled up weren't from the physical pain but from the shame of realizing I couldn't do something so simple without help. That was the morning I cried quietly at the kitchen table, sipping coffee with bare feet because I couldn't bring myself to ask anyone to help me. The house was silent, but inside I was screaming. There's nothing colder than the silence of a morning when you feel useless in your own skin. You try to hide it, even from yourself. You put on a brave face when your children call or when neighbors wave hello. But inside, every failed attempt adds another brick to the wall of isolation. I began to withdraw, not because I wanted to, but because moving through the world became too humiliating. I stopped going to the market because I dreaded stopping halfway down the aisle to lean against the cart, gasping for relief. I stopped going to the park because I feared not being able to make it back home. Even within my house, I started bargaining with myself. Wait until someone visits, I would whisper when I needed water or a book from the other room. That kind of dependence eats at your soul in ways no doctor ever warns you about. The cruelest part was the chorus of voices telling me this was normal. It's part of aging. You just have to get used to it. I heard those words from doctors, friends, and even family members. As if reaching this age automatically meant surrendering to constant pain. Those phrases carried a sting worse than any diagnosis because they disguised resignation as wisdom. It felt as though the world was telling me, "You've lived long enough, now endure what comes." But inside me, I still wanted to live, not just survive. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my legs pulsing with pain, and wondered if this was the beginning of the end. Not the end of life itself, but the end of truly living. The thought of years spent in this slow decline terrified me more than death. And yet, every new attempt, every new remedy that failed, pushed me closer to that despair. Looking back, I realized the hardest part wasn't the pain itself. It was what the pain took from me. My independence, my confidence, my dignity. It forced me into silence when I wanted to laugh. It kept me seated when I wanted to stand. It made me feel smaller in my own world. And that, perhaps, is the most devastating part of chronic pain. It doesn't just attack your body, it erodes your spirit. Day after day, I lived this cycle. Try something new, hope for relief, feel a brief flicker of possibility, and then crash back into disappointment. Every failed attempt felt like a betrayal. My body had become a stranger I could no longer trust. And the worst betrayal was believing, even for a moment, that maybe everyone else was right. That pain was simply my new normal. But something inside me refused to give in completely. Even in my darkest mornings, sitting in silence with tears I didn't want anyone to see, there was still a small voice whispering that life had to be more than this. I didn't yet know what would change, or how, but I carried that whisper with me through every failed attempt. And perhaps that whisper was what kept me from surrendering entirely to the prison my pain was building around me. It was a Sunday afternoon when my nephew Paul stopped by. He doesn't visit often because he lives in another town, but whenever he does, he always brings with him this light, this energy that fills the room. He's a physical therapist, full of ideas about movement and health, and he has a curiosity for natural remedies that I sometimes find amusing. I had learned to smile and listen to his suggestions, even if deep down I had little faith left that anything would help me. That day, as we sat at the kitchen table, he watched me rise slowly from my chair, hands pressed to my lower back for support. I tried to hide the stiffness, but he has a way of noticing what others overlook. "Do your knees still hurt?" he asked gently. I nodded and said, "Every day. I'm getting used to it." He didn't argue or offer advice in that moment, just gave me a look I've seen before, a mix of pity and determination. I thought nothing more of it, but a few days later, he came back carrying a small dark bottle in his hand. It was unlike anything I had seen. The glass was heavy and tinted almost black, with a cork lid pressed firmly on top. Inside was a liquid thick and golden, its color richer than olive oil, its scent earthy and strong, almost pungent. "What's this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Paul smiled. "Something I learned about from a woman in India when I was there for a conference," he explained. "She was over 90 and walked better than most of us. She swore this oil was her secret. Cold-pressed mustard oil." I had heard of mustard as a condiment, of course, sitting on tables next to ketchup at diners and ball games, but never as an oil you could take by the spoonful. To me, it sounded more like folklore than medicine, another story people pass around because it sounds interesting, not because it works. I told him so. But Paul placed the bottle on the table with a quiet insistence. "It costs you nothing to try," he said. "A teaspoon every morning, on an empty stomach. Give it a week and see what happens." The bottle sat there for 2 days, almost daring me to open it. Each time I passed by, I caught the faint aroma seeping from the cork, a mix of toasted nuts and something sharp, almost spicy. I wasn't convinced. After years of failed remedies, I didn't want to open my heart to yet another disappointment. But one night, after waking at 4 in the morning with my legs throbbing, I decided that trying one more thing couldn't possibly make things worse. The next morning, I poured a teaspoon of the thick oil into a small spoon. The taste was intense, spicy, bitter, almost burning as it slid down my throat. I grimaced, chasing it with a glass of warm water. I felt nothing that first day, and nothing the second. Just another nonsense, I thought. But on the third day, something subtle shifted. When I swung my legs off the bed, they didn't feel as heavy. My ankles weren't as swollen, and the stiffness didn't grip me quite as hard. It wasn't a miracle, just a small easing, but it was enough to make me notice. By the 4th morning, I walked to the kitchen without gripping the backs of chairs along the way. It wasn't until I reached the counter that I realized I had moved freely, without the usual pauses. That same night, I slept through until morning for the first time in weeks, without being jolted awake by stabbing pain in my legs. I told myself it might be a coincidence, but the seed of curiosity had been planted. Day by day, I began to notice more changes. Small ones at first. I bent to pick up a napkin that had fallen to the floor and realized I hadn't braced myself for pain before doing it. I sat down and stood up from the sofa with less effort. My steps around the house grew lighter, less deliberate, as though my body had stopped fighting me at every turn. Still, I resisted getting my hopes up. Pain has a cruel way of giving you 2 good days only to return on the 3rd with vengeance. I had learned not to trust relief. But there was something different this time. The improvements didn't vanish. They stayed, quietly building on one another. It wasn't spectacular, but it was steady. 1 week passed, then 2, and though I still felt aches here and there, my daily life began to change. I noticed I no longer searched for chairs to rest on during the walk from the living room to the bathroom. I dared to step outside and walk slowly down the block, cane in hand more for habit than necessity. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I thought was lost forever. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. In the 3rd week, I attempted something I hadn't done in months: climbing the stairs to my daughter's 2nd-floor apartment. Usually, I would wait in the car until someone came down to help me. That day, I gripped the handrail, took it slow, but reached her door on my own. When she opened it, her eyes widened in surprise. "You climbed alone," she said, and I simply nodded, a quiet smile on my face. The most surprising change came not from my legs, but from the return of energy I hadn't felt in years. I no longer woke up dreading the day. I found myself eager to sweep the yard, to walk to the bakery for fresh bread, to sit in the park and watch the world go by. One neighbor even stopped me to say, "You look different, it shows on your face." That simple comment stayed with me all afternoon, because it meant that what I felt inside was beginning to shine through. Sleep improved, too. I had grown used to restless nights, waking at odd hours, pacing the floor in silence. But with the oil, sleep came easier. A steady, uninterrupted rest that made mornings less of a battle. The fatigue that once clung to me began to lift. My body, though still aged, no longer felt like an enemy. I kept taking the oil every morning, faithfully, sometimes with a grimace at its strong taste, but always with a growing sense of gratitude. I realized that what I had dismissed as nonsense was quietly giving me back pieces of my life, pieces I thought were gone for good. And that is the strange thing about discovery. It doesn't always come with fanfare or dramatic results. Sometimes it begins with something as small as a teaspoon of oil, taken more out of curiosity than belief. But when the body begins to respond, when pain finally loosens its grip even slightly, hope returns. And for someone my age, hope is perhaps the most powerful medicine of all. The first time I truly noticed the change was on a crisp autumn morning when the leaves crunched beneath my shoes. I decided, almost without thinking, to walk farther than I usually dared. At first, I told myself I would just make it to the corner and back. But when I got there, something inside me urged me forward. My legs didn't feel as heavy. My knees weren't screaming in protest. Step by step, I passed one block, then another, until suddenly I realized I had walked 3 full blocks without stopping. For months, I hadn't even crossed the length of my living room without leaning against furniture. That day, I stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the cool air, stunned by what I had just done. It wasn't a marathon, but to me, it felt like conquering Mount Everest. Walking those 3 blocks brought me more than exercise. It brought back a sense of freedom I thought was gone forever. The world beyond my front door no longer felt like forbidden territory. I didn't need to calculate every step, didn't need to ask myself if the trip was worth the pain. For the first time in years, I simply walked. Just walked like I used to. The confidence from that morning carried me into new challenges. A week later, I visited my daughter's apartment. She lives on the 2nd floor of a modest building with no elevator. In the past, those stairs might as well have been a fortress wall. I always waited in the car until someone came down to help me, ashamed of how weak I had become. But this time, I stood at the bottom of the staircase and told myself to try. Slowly, hand on the rail, I climbed one step, then another. My heart pounded, not from pain but from determination. Halfway up I paused, expecting the familiar sharp ache to force me back. Yet it didn't come. I breathed, tightened my grip, and kept going. When I finally reached her door and knocked, my daughter opened it with wide, startled eyes. "Dad, you climbed up here by yourself?" she asked in disbelief. I simply nodded, too moved to find the right words. She hugged me tight, as if she too felt what this moment meant, a small victory that restored not only my strength but my pride. The changes didn't stay hidden for long. Neighbors began to notice. One afternoon, while sitting on a bench at the small square near my house, a neighbor walked by and said, "Mr. Anthony, you look different. It even shows on your face. What are you doing?" Her words startled me. I hadn't realized the improvement was visible to others. But she was right. It wasn't just that I was walking farther. My entire demeanor had shifted. I no longer shuffled with hesitation. My shoulders no longer slumped forward in defeat. There was lightness in my step and something brighter in my eyes. That simple comment stayed with me for days, reminding me that transformation is not only felt inside but radiates outward for the world to see. These outward signs of progress were encouraging, but the most precious part was rediscovering the small joys I had lost. I went back to the bakery on the corner for fresh bread, something I used to avoid because the trip was too painful. I strolled to the park with my cane hanging loosely at my side instead of pressed desperately against the ground. I swept the porch and felt the satisfaction of finishing a chore without collapsing into a chair halfway through. These ordinary acts, so simple to others, felt extraordinary to me. Each one was a quiet declaration. I am not defeated. Confidence crept back into my life like sunlight slowly warming a cold room. Where once I hesitated, now itched. Where once I doubted, now I believe. Even at night, when the house grew still, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Sleep came easier, not interrupted by sharp stabs of pain that forced me awake. I no longer dreaded the morning, wondering how to drag my body from the bed. Instead, I rose with something resembling eagerness, curious to see what the day would bring. One afternoon, I decided to test myself again. I took the longer route to the community center, where I sometimes joined other seniors for games and conversation. In the past, that walk had been unthinkable. But this time, I paced myself, listening to my body, and to my amazement, I arrived without exhaustion. Friends there noticed immediately. "You're walking differently," one of them remarked. "You seem lighter." Their smiles filled me with a pride I hadn't felt in so long. Even simple tasks inside the house transformed into moments of quiet celebration. I bent to tie my shoes without bracing myself for agony. I reached for a pot on the lower shelf without groaning. I even danced, just a little, swaying to a tune on the radio in my kitchen, laughing at the absurdity of it. These were not grand gestures, but they were mine, reclaimed from the grip of pain. What struck me most was how the improvements touched not only my body but also my spirit. Pain had made me cautious, withdrawn, almost invisible in my own life. But as mobility returned, so did pieces of myself I had thought were gone. Humor, confidence, even curiosity. I found myself wanting to go out more, to see friends, to talk, to laugh. The world no longer felt like a place to endure but a place to explore again, even if only in small steps. Looking back now, I realized the transformation was not sudden but gradual, built step by step, day by day. At first, I doubted. Then I noticed small changes. And soon those changes piled up until they reshaped my daily existence. It's easy to dismiss small progress when you're longing for a miracle, but in truth, life is made of these small victories. Walking 3 blocks. Climbing stairs. Hearing a neighbor say you look different. Smiling at your daughter's surprise. These moments stitch together into something larger, the return of dignity and hope. I won't pretend I became young again. My body still carries the years, and I still have aches from time to time. But the transformation was not about erasing age. It was about reclaiming life within age. About proving to myself that pain, though powerful, was not absolute. That even after 80, the body can surprise you, and the spirit can be renewed. That is what the oil gave me, not just relief, but the courage to believe again. Every step I take now feels like a gift. Every chore I finish feels like a victory. Every smile from a neighbor feels like recognition of a battle won. And in these moments, I no longer feel like a prisoner of my own body. I feel free in the most ordinary, most beautiful way. For weeks, I carried my little secret quietly, sipping the golden oil each morning, feeling the changes ripple slowly through my body. I hadn't told many people what I was doing. Part of me feared they would laugh, the way people laugh at old wives' tales, the way doctors brush off anything not written on a prescription pad. But as the days turned into weeks and my life began to shift, I knew it was time to share what was behind it all. The secret was not a new medicine, not a complicated treatment, not even something expensive or hidden in some faraway clinic. It was a bottle of cold-pressed mustard oil. That's right, mustard oil, the kind pressed from tiny seeds that most of us only think of when we see a yellow condiment squirted onto a hot dog. But this was different. This was oil drawn straight from the seed, unrefined, dark, and earthy, the way it has been made for centuries in parts of India and Bangladesh. I had never even heard of using it this way before my nephew placed that small bottle in my hands. To me, mustard was just another flavoring, something sitting beside ketchup at the ballpark. But in other cultures, mustard oil is a staple, not only for cooking but also for health. For generations, families in villages across Asia have rubbed it into tired muscles, massaged it into aching joints, and even taken it by the spoonful each morning. To them, this is not unusual or exotic. It is simply tradition, a wisdom passed down quietly from grandparents to grandchildren. When I began to read more about it, I was startled by how much knowledge had been sitting in plain sight. Cold-pressed mustard oil is rich in natural anti-inflammatory compounds, particularly isothiocyanates, which come directly from mustard seeds. These are the same compounds that give mustard its sharp bite, the same compounds that sting the nose when you take a whiff, and yet inside the body, why they work gently to calm inflammation, easing the swelling that makes joints ache and ankles puff up. Science, I later discovered, had already studied this. Articles in journals confirmed what people in distant villages already knew. Mustard oil could soothe the body from within, in ways modern pills often promised but failed to deliver without side effects. The more I learned, the more I wondered why something so effective and natural had been ignored here in the West. We are taught from an early age to trust what comes in a box, sealed and stamped with instructions. We turn to brightly packaged pills and tubes of cream with names so long they barely fit on the label. And yet, here was something simple, inexpensive, grown from the earth itself, and used by millions elsewhere, that never seemed to reach us. The answer, I realized, was not really about effectiveness, but about business. Pharmaceutical companies make money when remedies can be patented, branded, and sold in measured doses. A seed pressed into oil and passed from hand to hand holds no profit for them. There are no television commercials for cold-pressed mustard oil, no glossy pamphlets in the doctor's office, no corporate interest in teaching people that healing might also come from simplicity. Instead, we were told that pain is inevitable with age and the only way forward is through endless prescriptions. But in other places, tradition carries a different weight. In India, for example, it is common to massage a baby's skin with warm mustard oil, believing it strengthens bones and muscles. Elderly villagers rub it on their joints before bed, wrapping themselves in warm cloth to let the oil sink into weary limbs. Families drizzle it over food not just for flavor but for its health-giving properties. No one questions whether it works. They have seen it work for generations. It is part of their daily rhythm of life. The contrast struck me deeply. In the West, we often dismiss such traditions as superstition until a study appears to validate them. But by then, entire generations have lost the chance to benefit. I thought of all the creams I had rubbed onto my knees, all the pills I had swallowed that burned my stomach, all the expensive visits to specialists who shrugged and said, "It's normal at your age." And all the while, this simple oil sat forgotten, unadvertised, uncelebrated, waiting quietly in cultures far from mine. What humbled me most was realizing that it wasn't magic, it was chemistry meeting tradition. Mustard oil contains not only isothiocyanates but also omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin E, both vital for bone and tissue health. It stimulates blood circulation, which explains why my ankles no longer swell like balloons each morning. And unlike the medicines that made me dizzy or upset my stomach, the oil blended naturally with my body. It didn't force relief, it encouraged healing, slowly but surely. The first time I explained this to a friend at the community center, she chuckled. "You mean mustard oil, like the stuff you cook with?" she asked, eyebrows raised. I nodded, and I could see the disbelief in her face, the same disbelief I had carried at first. I told her about the studies I had read, about the elderly woman in India who still walked with vigor at 90, about the way my own body had changed since I started. She shook her head and smiled, half amused, half curious. A week later, she asked me for some to try herself. To me, that is the beauty of tradition. It spreads not through billboards or advertisements, but through human experience. One person finds relief, shares it with another, and soon what was forgotten becomes known again. Cold-pressed mustard oil was not some miracle bottled in secrecy. It was knowledge that had slipped through the cracks of modern culture. In a world obsessed with quick fixes and instant relief, its slow, steady power had been overlooked. And yet, here I was, living proof that sometimes the old ways still have value. The oil didn't erase my years, didn't make me young again, but it gave me something more precious than youth. It gave me back dignity. It gave me mornings where I rose without groaning, afternoons where I walked without fear, evenings where I slept without interruption. It gave me hope, and that is something no cream or pill had ever truly done. I began to see the story of mustard oil not only as my personal discovery but as part of a larger conversation about how we treat aging. In the West, we are often told to fight age, to cover it up, to medicate it into submission. In other cultures, aging is met with rituals, foods, and practices that honor the body rather than deny it. Mustard oil was, to me, a symbol of that difference. It was not about resisting age, but about supporting the body with patience and care. I don't blame my doctors for not suggesting it. It's not part of their textbooks, not part of the system that trains them. But I do wish we were more open to the wisdom that exists outside of pharmacies and hospitals. Too often, we dismiss what we don't understand, and in doing so, we leave behind tools that could ease our suffering. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Now, when people ask me how I managed to walk again with less pain, I don't hesitate to tell them. Cold-pressed mustard oil. I say it with pride, not because it's some secret I want to guard, but because it feels like a truth worth sharing. It may not work for everyone, and it may not be a cure-all, but for me, it was enough. Enough to shift the course of my days, enough to make life fuller again. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes healing doesn't come in the form we expect. It doesn't always arrive in a capsule from the pharmacy or a new machine at the therapist's office. Sometimes, it comes in a dark glass bottle handed to you by someone who cares, filled with a golden oil pressed from seeds that have nourished generations before you. That is the forgotten secret of cold-pressed mustard oil. Not just its compounds, not just its science, but its reminder that wisdom lives in tradition, waiting for us to listen. When the first weeks passed and I felt changes in my body that no cream, no pill, no therapy had ever given me, I wanted to understand why. At 84, I'm not naive enough to believe in miracles. I had been fooled too many times before, by labels that promised relief, by specialists who swore the latest treatment would make all the difference. I needed proof that what I was experiencing wasn't just in my head, wasn't just wishful thinking. So I started to dig deeper. Paul, my nephew, was the first to explain what he knew. As a physical therapist, he had studied anatomy and movement, but he also had a deep interest in traditional medicine. He told me that mustard seeds are packed with natural compounds, things like isothiocyanates, that science has recognized as powerful anti-inflammatories. They are the reason mustard hits the nose so sharply, but they are also why the oil can soothe inflammation from the inside out. He showed me articles from journals I had never heard of, written by doctors and researchers far away, who confirmed what I was feeling in my own bones. One study in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology compared the anti-inflammatory effects of mustard oil compounds to certain prescription drugs. Another, from the Indian Journal of Medical Research, described how generations in South Asia used this oil to relieve mild to moderate joint pain and circulation problems. Reading those words felt like uncovering a hidden treasure. It wasn't just folklore, it was knowledge backed by science, tested and confirmed, but forgotten by most of us here in the West. The more I read, the more I realized that my experience was not an accident. The swelling in my ankles lessened because the oil helped improve circulation. My stiffness eased because those compounds were calming the inflammation in my joints. And the reason I didn't feel the sickening side effects I had endured with pills was simple. This wasn't a drug manufactured in a factory. It was a food, pressed from seeds, as natural as olive oil or honey. My body recognized it, welcomed it, instead of fighting against it. Encouraged, I decided to share my experience. I began small, speaking to the women at the senior center where I sometimes joined for games or coffee. At first, they smiled politely, the way people do when they think you've stumbled into another health fad. Mustard oil? One of them laughed. That's for cooking, not for healing. I understood their skepticism. I had carried it myself when Paul first handed me the bottle. But I told him the truth, not just about how far I could walk now, but about the nights I finally slept through without waking in agony, about the way I could climb stairs again, about how I felt lighter, freer. One woman, a friend named Clara, decided to try. She suffered from stiffness in her hands, especially in the mornings when her fingers curled so tightly she could barely hold a teacup. I gave her some oil, showed her how to take a teaspoon each morning, and suggested she also rub a little into her hands at night with a warm towel. A week later, she found me at the center and hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. Her eyes were wet with tears. "I knitted last night," she whispered, her voice trembling. For the first time in months, I didn't drop the needles. Another neighbor, George, an old friend who had stopped coming to church because of hip pain, was curious after hearing Clara's story. He tried the oil too, and within weeks, he told me he no longer needed to grip the pews for balance. He wasn't suddenly young again, but he could walk confidently enough to attend Sunday service without fear of falling. At our age, that kind of independence is not just comfort, it's dignity. These stories began to spread quietly, one person to another, until it felt like a ripple in the pond of our little community. People didn't see mustard oil as a miracle cure, but they began to see it as something worth trying. The beauty of it was not only in the relief it offered, but in the safety it carried. Unlike the heavy prescriptions that left us dizzy or the painkillers that tore up our stomachs, The oil didn't bring new problems while fixing old ones. No headaches, no nausea, no groggy mornings. It was gentle, natural, and most importantly, forgiving to bodies already burdened with age. Of course, it wasn't perfect. The oil didn't erase pain overnight, didn't replace knees worn down by decades, didn't solve every ailment. It worked slowly, building its effect day by day, in small but meaningful ways. That was perhaps the most important lesson of all. Consistency mattered more than miracles. The teaspoon each morning, taken faithfully, was not a dramatic event. It was a ritual, a quiet promise to my body that I was still willing to care for it. And in return, my body responded, not immediately, not spectacularly, but steadily. Sometimes people ask me, how long did it take before you really felt a difference? I always answered the same way, the third day. That was when the first subtle shift appeared, when I woke without the heaviness I had come to expect. But the real transformation came not in days but in weeks, in the accumulation of small improvements. I told them not to expect fireworks but to watch carefully for the quieter victories. Fewer pauses when walking across the room. Less swelling in the ankles at night. A deeper sleep. Those are the signs that tell you something real is happening. In a world where advertisements scream about quick fixes and miracle cures, mustard oil teaches patience. It asks for consistency and rewards it with progress that lasts. For people my age, who have lived long enough to know there are no shortcuts in life, that message resonates. It's not about erasing the years, it's about making the years we have left more livable. The more people around me tried it, the more convinced I became that this wasn't just my story. It was ours. We, the seniors who had been told too often that pain was our destiny, discovered together that relief could come from something simple, affordable, and safe. We began to exchange tips. How to warm the oil slightly before rubbing it on stiff joints, how to chase the strong taste with a sip of warm water, and how to choose the right bottle at the store. There was a sense of camaraderie in it, a shared journey back to dignity. I often think about how easily I could have ignored that little bottle, how quickly I could have dismissed it as nonsense. If I had, I would still be sitting at my kitchen table, staring at socks I couldn't pull on, hiding tears of frustration. Instead, I walk 3 blocks without stopping, I climb my daughter's stairs, I sleep through the night, and I share hope with others who had almost given up. Proof doesn't always come in clinical trials or newspaper headlines. Sometimes it comes in the smile of a friend who can knit again, in the steady step of a neighbor returning to church, in the laughter of a group of seniors trading stories about how they take their morning teaspoon. These are not dramatic miracles. They are human ones, quiet, humble, and real. And that is what convinced me more than anything else. Science gave me the facts, but people gave me the proof. Together, they told a story that no longer felt like chance but like truth. Cold-pressed mustard oil, forgotten by many, still had power to ease pain, restore confidence, and remind us that even in old age, change is possible. As weeks turned into months, I realized something that humbled me. The oil was not the only reason I had begun to feel like myself again. Yes, cold-pressed mustard oil had lit the spark, but it was everything else I added around it that fanned the flame. I came to understand that no single cure, no single pill or bottle, holds the whole answer. Healing is a partnership between what we give our bodies and how our bodies respond. At my age, that truth carries even more weight. It started with gentle daily exercises. For years, the very word exercise intimidated me. I thought it meant machines, sweat, gyms, and pushing myself beyond what my joints could handle. But I learned that exercise for someone in their 80s doesn't need to look like that. It can be as simple as stretching before getting out of bed, circling the ankles slowly, swinging the arms in soft arcs as though swimming through the air. I began with just 10 minutes every morning. Some days, it was less. I would move slowly, breathing with each motion, reminding myself that consistency was more important than intensity. Over time, my body began to thank me. My balance improved, my legs felt sturdier, and my confidence grew. There's a deep joy in realizing you can still move, not as you once did, but enough to feel alive in your own skin. Then there was the power of restful sleep. For years, I had treated sleep like an afterthought, something I simply endured between long nights of tossing and turning. Pain had trained me to expect interruptions, to wake in frustration at 2 or 3 in the morning. But as the oil eased my body, I decided to honor sleep the way it deserved. I turned off the television earlier, put my phone away, and let the house grow quiet before bed. Sometimes I rubbed warm oil into my knees or back and then placed a hot towel over them, allowing the comfort to seep in. The result was a rest deeper than I had known in decades. I no longer woke with that dreadful heaviness, that sensation of carrying weights on my limbs. Instead, I woke lighter, ready to move. Restful sleep, I realized, is not just about hours. It is about quality. When sleep improves, everything improves. Pain, mood, memory, even hope. Nutrition, too, played a role. I didn't become a health expert, and I didn't overhaul my diet overnight. But I began paying closer attention to what I was putting into my body. Slowly, I cut back on fried foods that had long been my guilty comfort. I reduced the sugar in my morning coffee, swapped white bread for whole grain, and added more vegetables to my plate. I realized that certain foods I ate out of habit, processed meats, pastries, packaged snacks, were quietly fueling inflammation. When I eased them out, my body responded with gratitude. My digestion improved, my swelling lessened, and my energy became steadier. These were not drastic sacrifices. They were small adjustments, one by one, but together they reshaped how I felt. I also discovered that food is not only fuel but medicine, and the closer it comes to the earth, the better it serves us. What struck me most was how all these changes, gentle movement, better sleep, mindful eating, wove together with the oil to create something larger than the sum of its parts. A holistic approach, as people like to call it, though to me it felt simply like treating my body with the respect it had long deserved. I wasn't forcing it with chemicals or punishing it with harsh routines. I was caring for it, patiently, consistently, with dignity. And my body, in return, began to cooperate again. The beauty of this integration was not just in the results, but in the message it carried. Aging well is not about fighting time, but about living in harmony with it. The oil helped, yes, but it worked best when I supported it with better choices. A teaspoon in the morning was powerful, but so was the decision to take a walk instead of sitting all day. So was the choice to turn off the lights and truly rest, to prepare a simple soup filled with vegetables rather than reaching for something from a package. These are not dramatic acts, but at my age, they are radical in their own quiet way. They say, I still value this body. I still want to care for it. And here is the most surprising truth. The effort didn't feel like a burden. Instead of being chores, these small changes became rituals that gave rhythm to my days. My morning stretches became a gentle awakening, my teaspoon of oil a moment of commitment, my evening rest a ceremony of peace. Even cooking shifted from routine to care. Chopping vegetables, seasoning a broth, it all became part of how I honored myself. Of course, there are still days when pain returns, when fatigue whispers that I should sit and do nothing. But I've learned that healing is not about perfection. It is about resilience, about returning again and again to the practices that help. The oil is one part, but without the others, its effect would have been smaller. Together, they created a new way of living, not free from age, but free from despair. I sometimes think back to the mornings when I sat with cold coffee and colder feet, feeling useless and defeated. How different my life feels now. Not because I am young again, but because I no longer accept that suffering must be my normal. Gentle exercises remind me that I still have strength. Restful sleep restores me in ways no pill ever could. Better food fuels me instead of fighting me. And mustard oil ties it all together, a symbol of what happens when we choose to care for ourselves even when the world tells us it's too late. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. To anyone listening, I would say this: don't underestimate the small things. Healing at our age rarely comes in grand gestures. It comes in teaspoons, in stretches, in quiet nights of real sleep, in bowls of nourishing food. It comes in the patience to keep going, in the humility to learn from traditions, and in the courage to believe that life can still improve. Aging is not the end of growth. It is simply another chapter, one where we must treat our bodies not as burdens but as companions who have carried us faithfully for decades. And that, to me, is the essence of a holistic approach to aging well. It is not about clinging to youth or pretending we are 30 again. It is about dignity, about harmony, about making peace with our bodies while giving them every chance to serve us with strength and grace. It is never too late to begin. I am living proof. There was a time when I thought my story had already been written, that the chapters left to me would be filled only with pain, fatigue, and resignation. But I was wrong. Cold-pressed mustard oil did not erase the years or make me young again, yet it gave me something I value far more, the chance to live with dignity. It eased the weight of suffering just enough to remind me that life, even in my 80s, still holds surprises. It taught me that it's never too late to try again, never too late to discover something that can make the days brighter and the nights more restful. We are often told that pain is inevitable with age, that it is the price of survival. But I no longer believe that. Pain may come, but it doesn't have to define us. Small steps, whether it is a teaspoon of oil, a short walk, or the decision to sleep better, can create real change. Aging does not mean surrendering. It means adapting, honoring the body that has carried us, and finding new ways to keep moving forward. So my message to you is simple. Do not give up on yourself. There is hope, and there is always room for new beginnings, even after 80. If my story has touched you, I invite you to share it with someone who may need encouragement. Tell me in the comments what has helped you in your own journey, because your story might inspire someone else. And if you want to hear more stories of resilience, healing, and hope, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so others can find strength in it too. Every step we take, no matter how small, is proof that we are still here, still living, still moving forward.